Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining me today this afternoon. Lead lacerations and orbital fracture are the most common facial injuries, often associated with the ocular injuries. The further drives dictates the management of the ocular injuries first before the lead trauma and orbital fracture, as has been discussed in the previous talk. Traumatic lead lacerations require a thorough and a well-planned approach to provide the best cosmetic outcome. It should be aimed at developing a stable eyelid margin, maintaining adequate and symmetrical vertical height. It is desirable to create a smooth and epithelialized internal surface. In case of the deep injury, reconstruction should be performed in layers as per correct anatomical orientation. Orbital septum, if ruptured, should never be repaired. Otherwise, it may compromise the lid excursion and lead to lag ophthalmos. Anti-lamellar defect not involving the lid margin should be repaired by the primary closure. Now, coming to the principles of lid reconstruction, if there is a tendency for the skin edges to invert, use interrupted vertical matrix suture, especially for the lid margin reconstruction. In vertical matrix suture, pass deep bite through the tarsus across the wound at lid margins at the equal level of the depth on either side of the wound. Wound should be approximated to look for pouting, and then sutures are secured with the knots. Now, a short review about direct closure. During direct closure, make sure that the needle should enter and exit the tissue at the same depth on both sides of the laceration. Otherwise, disrupted and stepped up closure will result. Needle should enter and exit the tissues at right angle to the skin. This will heap up the tissues and prevent sunken scar. Secondly, needle should engage the tissue at an equal distance from the end of the laceration. Otherwise, wound gape will result. Therefore, the crux is skin laceration will heal flatter if the tissue edges are initially everted. If it is flat or inverted initially, then the final scar will lead to further inversion and a possible divot in the tissues. Animal bites are essentially important etiology for the lead laceration. In the past, it was believed that because of risk of infection, lead laceration should be left open and repaired later on. But recent peer reviews suggest primary suturing helps in achieving early wound healing and better cosmesis, producing a socially and functionally acceptable scar. The two main components to prevent the infection and the spread of the rabies are thorough debridement and cleaning. A randomized control trial compared primary closure versus non-closure in the dog bite. They found that the overall infection rate was 8.3% and no difference in infection rate was detected between the two groups. A short video showing the repair of lead laceration and canalicular tear. The patient received tetanus toxoid, anti-rabies vaccination, and serum infiltration before the repair. The proximal end of lower lid canaliculus was identified. Adrenaline was instilled to find out the upper toned canaliculus, but we were unable to find out the toned canaliculus. So we went ahead with primary closure of upper lid. Far, near technique was used to oppose the lids. Ensure that the wound pouching should achieve. Margin end of the suture were left long. See, pouting is nicely achieved. 3-layered closure was carried out, one at the posterior border, one at the lash line, one at the meibomian orifice. Deep suturing was carried out. Additional sutures may be applied to oppose the lid. And then final skin suturing. Inner surface of toned tear should also be secured to provide the smooth surface. Skin suturing. Margin suture and left long secured into skin suture knot to prevent corneal abrasion. Pneumonoca stunt was inserted into the toned lower lid canaliculus. Bowman's probe was used to guide its insertion. And then pericanalicular tear is repaired. from inferior to superior direction, and later on skin margins are sutured. Deep tissue suturing and skin suturing. Mini-Vanuka stent well in place. Remaining amount of serum instilled over the wound. These are post-operative photograph of the patient. At 3 weeks, at 1 year, naturally looking lid contour was formed. At 3 months, Mini-Vanuka stent was removed. Patient doesn't have symptoms of epiphora. Now, in moderate loss of the tissues, surrounding tissues are mobilized to fill up the defect using canthotomy, cantholysis, tensile semicircular rotational flap, or tarsoconjunctival flap, or free tarsoconjunctival graft. In severe loss of the tissues, lid shearing procedures were used, like Hughes and Cutler Beard. Now, coming to medial canthal injuries, a 23-year-old male present with a medial canthal avulsion, non-margin involving lower lid laceration, covenanted fracture at the root of the nose. So, how do we repair such cases? Medial canthal avulsion most commonly involve the medial canthal tendon. If the proximal end is identified, suture it to distal cut end. If not identified, then the distal portion of the tendon is sutured to the periosteum at the level of the nasomaxillary suture. In our patient, the remaining canthal was fixed to the fixation plate. These are post-operative photograph of 3 weeks after suture removal and at 18 months. Now, what will happen if meticulous repair was not done? Then we have a pictures like this. The first patient had lead notching, cicatricial ectropion, leg ophthalmos, requires second surgeries of skin grafting for correction. The second patient is of 65-year-old female who has a medial canthal dystopia, entropion, require canthoplasty. Another complication which we can have is foreign body granuloma. Now, coming to the orbital fracture need to be diagnosed and intervene timely to prevent globe malposition and impaired vision. They are further classified into isolated, combined, and apex fracture. Isolated are further divided into pure, impure on the basis of the rim involvement. Orbital fracture shows different presentation in pediatric populations. Younger children less than 7 years are more likely to develop roof fracture, whereas older children and adults often develop floor fracture. This is due to difference in pneumatization and craniofacial ratios. Pediatric population globe remain uninjured, hence it is known as white-eyed fracture. However, these patients have a severe extraocular movement limitation. Therefore, threshold for the surgical intervention is much lower as compared to the adults. 3 theories has been described to explain the mechanism of blowout fractures, but we have a variety of blowout fractures, so it is believed that more than one mechanism exists simultaneously. Now, CT scan is a sensitive tool for initial evaluation of the head and facial trauma. Sometimes it's not possible to examine and traumatize an unconscious patient, so fine cut sections are required to thoroughly evaluate the orbit. Axial cut is ideal for evaluation of the medial wall fracture. Pay attention to the medial wall. It may become almost straight, leading directly to the optic foramen. Sagittal section helps in evaluating the anterior posterior extent of the fracture. Coronal cut best for localizing the orbital fracture with displacement of bony fragments, and soft tissue helps in evaluating muscle position in relationship to the fracture. While evaluating the orbital fracture, it's important to identify the inferior medial orbital strut, which is nothing but the combination of the maxillary bone and ethmoid bone, serve as attachment to the sensory site for suspensory ligament, and involvement of this junction leads to enophthalmos. Additionally, rounding of the inferior rectus muscle is also more likely to cause enophthalmos. So clinical symptoms, we can have orbital emphysema, intraorbital nerve dysfunction, diplopia, and ophthalmos. So the question is, which patients require intervention, surgical interventions? The indications are diplopia, enophthalmos, cosmetically unacceptable, large size fractures. However, any intervention which puts the globe in jeopardized state should be considered as a contraindication. The immediate treatment indications are diplopia with CT and trapped soft tissues, non-resolving ocular cardiac reflex, bradycardia, white eye, blowout fracture. While in the rest of the condition, surgery can be deferred until periorbital edema subsides and patient medical condition gets stabilized. Few intraoperative consideration during internal orbital reconstruction. Whatever approach is used, transcutaneous or transconjunctival, subperiosteal dissection should be carried out to identify the orbital plate of the palatine bone, which acts as a posterior ledge onto which the orbital implant rests. Secondly, floor of the orbit ascends upward. making an angle 30 degree. So one should ascend upward while dissecting. Otherwise, one has a tendency to dissect into the maxillary sinus. The goal of the surgery is to achieve the anatomy. But floor anatomy is not so simple. It forms a Lazius configuration, anterior concave, posterior convex. And this convexity is formed by the upward bulge of the maxillary sinus, which is important for maintaining the anterior position of the globe. Regarding the management of the trapdoor fracture in pediatric population, it is different. Just one slide. See, periorbital soft tissue is pinched to the orbital floor. One should not attempt to pull out the contents of the fracture defect. Instead, push the trapdoor downward to flex and release the incarcerated tissues. If not possible, enlarge the defect, remove the contents, and perform serial force reduction test to check release. And then suitable reconstructive material is placed to expand the defect.
Sorry to interrupt you, doctor.
Thank you. Thank you.